Brigadier General Asaf Orion is joining us, former head Strategic Division IDF, General's Staff Planning Directorate at Washington, D.C. I appreciate your joining us. I'm joined by Kabir Taneja. He's Deputy Director and Fellow Strategic Studies at ORF. And Itai Melchior, Researcher and Advisor in Middle East and Africa Affairs at Israel National Security, joins us from Haifa in Israel. And Syed Mohammad Marandi is Professor at Tehran University. So we're getting voices from across. Let me come to my first Israeli guests at the moment, because you all are in the heart of this battle. Brigadier General Asaf Orion, your reactions to what has happened in the last 48 hours. Do you see a de-escalation or a further escalation of the conflict?
We are now almost a year into an offensive opened by Hamas and joined by Iran and all its proxies. Israel has been on the defensive in the Lebanese front. It didn't open recently for almost 11 months. Mid-September, Israel decided to go on the offensive. And you mentioned some of the operations, and there is a streak of successful attacks, staggering Hezbollah's structure, severing its command structure. I wouldn't say decapitation, because it's from the chest up, and also taking out a lot of seemingly secretive capabilities hidden inside populated areas. That's another signature of Iran's school of war. So what we are seeing now is Israel rolling back 2 decades of military buildup by Hezbollah and Iran in Lebanon. And I expect that Israel will not stop before a serious amount of those capabilities are being destroyed and the conditions are being met to accept the terms of Israel, which have not been yet announced. But I'm sure that will include decoupling of the attacks in Lebanon from the attacks in Gaza, removing Hezbollah capabilities from the south in accordance with 1701, dealing with the rest of the arsenal according to 1559 and other aspects.
Itai Melchior, you've just heard what was just said. Do you see this as therefore restricted to Lebanon? We're already seeing today attacks on Houthi targets in Yemen. Are we seeing an expanding theater of war, Itai Melchior?
Yes, well, thank you for having me on the show. You forgot to mention also attacks in Syria, which is a way in which Iran fuels and supports Hezbollah. And also I would like to correct the ticker on the bottom of your screen that says that it's a war between Israel and Lebanon. Lebanon is not a side to this war, and Hezbollah is actually a parasite in Lebanon. It is an Iranian proxy. Israel has no dispute, no border dispute with Lebanon. Everything is settled and really no reason for war. So therefore, I think that at least on this front, the idea is to get to some kind of agreement. Yes, to have the Lebanese army take control of southern Lebanon, hopefully without an Israeli soldier having to step foot in Lebanon, because it will only be going in and then coming out again once an agreement is reached. So why not reach an agreement in advance? That still leaves the question of the power of Hezbollah, because Hezbollah, fueled by Iranian money, is much richer than Lebanon as a country, which is a failing state currently with many problems, and a low-level Hezbollah activist, terrorists makes a better living than a high-ranking officer in the Lebanese army. So there's still room to worry if Hezbollah is not dealt to the root.
But you're saying it will be limited to Hezbollah for now. Am I correct that Hezbollah and the proxies of Iran will remain the target? It's very targeted. Am I correct?
It is correct. We've heard voices from Iraq now, that some voices saying that Israel may attack civilian infrastructure in Iraq. It's true that Israel has been shot at, again, by Iranian proxies from Iraq, but Israel has no beef with Iraq. I don't see Israel attacking Iraqi civilian infrastructure, maybe camps of terrorists. That is on the table. It is a possibility. That will be a very strong signal to Iran if this does happen. We see the attacks in Yemen on the Houthis, where there was infrastructure targeted, and I think this is a strong signal to Iran.
You know, Syed Mohammad Marandi, you're professor at Tehran University, you're hearing these voices from Israel saying Hezbollah and the Houthis are all proxies of Iran. What is happening is a targeted attack on these proxies, on the so-called axis of resistance formed by Iran. And there's speculation that Israel could launch a ground offensive in Lebanon. How will Tehran respond? Is Tehran ready to risk a direct war with Israel? Or are you going to continue this fight through the axis of resistance, through proxies like Hezbollah?
Iran will definitely strike the Israeli regime directly because it has violated Iranian sovereignty multiple times. It has murdered an Iranian general just recently and also injured the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. Mm-hmm. And it has murdered an official guest of Iran, Mr. Ismail Haniyeh. Mm-hmm. So Iran will definitely strike, and it will strike hard, but it will also support the axis of resistance. It will enable them to defeat the regime. No, Israel can slaughter women and children, but it cannot win the war.
No, you're saying it can't win the war, but the fact is that the Hezbollah, which you call part of this axis of resistance, has taken a real beating in recent days. And now with the Hezbollah under attack, with targeted attacks on the Houthis, it seems that your axis of resistance has been taken by surprise. Now, global security strategists expecting a sharper response from forces loyal to the regime in Iran have found that these forces actually have been severely damaged by the Israelis in the last couple of days.
Well, Iran is not a regime. It is an Islamic republic that has popular legitimacy. Mm-hmm. And unlike the Israeli regime, which is an ethno-supremacist entity, Iran does not believe in racial hierarchy. Mm-hmm. These different members of the Axis resistance are not proxies, they're allies of Iran, mm-hmm. and they were not actually taken by surprise. In the last speech by Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah before he was martyred, he said that he may not live to see the end of the war, but that the resistance will be victorious. And the axis of resistance will continue to support Hezbollah and the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine against this genocidal regime. This is a Western colony that is racist, that believes in racial hierarchy, that carries out ethnic cleansing, that carries out Holocaust, and it must be stopped.
You know, I'll come back to you, Professor Marandi, because the words that you're using could easily be used against Hezbollah and its proxies and the violence they've unleashed in Lebanon and other parts. Kabir Taneja, you're Deputy Director and Fellow Strategic Studies at ORF. What's your sense? Are we seeing now a weakening of some of these Islamic radical forces that have been propped up by Iran over the last couple of decades?
Thanks, Rajdeep. I think at least Hezbollah and Hamas have suffered significant setbacks. I think that's very difficult to deny at this point of time. Mm-hmm. As some of your speakers earlier said, these have been military setbacks, right? And which is also very important because their capacities have been degraded over the past couple of months. So from that aspect, yes, they have suffered huge blows, and even if there are going to be attempts to sort of rebuild, it is going to take a lot of time and a lot of capacity to do that. Now, we have the bigger question here is the political vacuum going to be big enough in a country, let's say, like Lebanon? And are there actors willing to step in right now to prevent sort of these actors like Hezbollah to rebuild and to sort of build those capacities once again militarily? That answer remains unknown right now. As it was said before, the situation, the political and economic situation in Lebanon is quite poor. So there is a lot of vacuum, both political and economic, for any of these actors to sort of try and rebuild over the next couple of months. But I think for a significant period of time going forward, at least their military capacities will be under high question.
But as we've seen, General Asaf Orion, in the past, every time we feel that Hezbollah has been pushed on the back foot, they've regrouped. Now, is Israel ready for a long war? Is there any end game at all, any de-escalation at all possible? Or do you believe Israel now senses this is a tipping point, this is the moment to go in and clean up the Hezbollah?
I think in the last year, it's the first time that Israel goes, unlike past conflicts, of degrade and deter, to actually defeat and reestablish the ground rules around it. I'm astonished to hear the speaker from Iran, a genocidal country, calling for the actual destruction of the state of Israel, and whose whole efforts were building around Israel a ring of those terror armies in order to run a war of attrition against Israel until its destruction. Israel is resolved not to allow it. It started with defeating Hamas, rolling back 2 decades of military buildup. It's now busy in rolling back Hezbollah, 2 decades of military buildup since the Second Lebanon War, if we don't count from 1982. And I think we are watching now some effort into reversal of those tectonics that Iran has tried to build around us, and it will escalate until the terms are met. I think what we are
what are those terms?
If
I may ask specifically, what are the terms that you believe can result in the end of the conflict?
Eventually, Israel has to see zero threats to its borders on behalf of Iran's proxies. It means no open fire, no Hezbollah on our border, no weapons, certainly heavy weapons out of the state's control in Lebanon, so non-governmental weapons, and arms embargo on non-governmental weapons in Lebanon.
Okay, let me take that to you, Syed Mohammad Marandi. You heard what the Israelis are saying. You mentioned earlier that Iran will give a direct response to Israel. Do you really believe that's what Iran wants, or is that just bravado? Will there be public support if Iran is dragged into this war, as you seem to suggest?
Yes, without a doubt. The Israeli regime has violated Iranian sovereignty on multiple occasions. It has carried out assassinations. It has carried out airstrikes. And there is no doubt that the Iranians will punish the regime. This is a situation very much like what you had in India before independence. The British colonized the country, and whenever the indigenous population wanted freedom, they were called barbarians, they were attacked and killed, and if they attacked the British, they would be seen or presented as violating the British sovereignty and British rights. And it's the same thing. These Zionists have immigrated from Europe, and they are not indigenous to the region, and they have been massacring Palestinians for decades, and this simply cannot go on. They consider themselves a superior race.
You're projecting yourself as the victims, but the fact is, there is no strong condemnation coming for Israeli action from most of the countries in the region, in the Gulf region. While Iran has called for a meeting of the OIC, the fact is many of these countries believe they are also the targets of your axis for resistance. For instance, Saudi Arabia. Is Iran going to get isolated if you expand this theater of war, Professor Marandi?
Iran has no conflict with any country in the Persian Gulf region or any of its neighbors. Iran supports the Palestinian cause, and the countries of the region are encouraged by Iran to isolate the regime and to condemn the regime and to support the Palestinian people who've been brutalized for over 3/4 of a century.
You're hearing this voice, therefore, Itai Melchior. Do you see, given this kind of belligerence from Iran, it may well be not realized on the ground, but do you believe that Israel needs to also find a way to have some kind of an end game of de-escalation? Does Benjamin Netanyahu have that end game inside, or is he also going to engage now in competitive belligerence boosted by the killing of Nasrallah?
So, of course, the end game, as was mentioned earlier, is in the end, Israel wants peace. Israel did not start this war. The war was started by Hamas and then by Hezbollah, who's already fired more than 8,000 rockets into Israel. And my misinformed Iranian colleague is giving some propaganda there, but he has never visited Israel or met any of its 20-something Muslim percent population, who are very happy to have the highest level of living in the Middle East, including maybe except for the UAE and Persian Gulf, certainly more than Iran. And today Netanyahu spoke directly to the Iranian people and said that we have no conflict with Iran or with the Iranian people. The number of Palestinians has been growing steadily, which is very strange for a people that is massacred and holocausted. I think the professor should study the meaning of the word Holocaust used, and then he will be much better informed. The end game is peace.
But do you accept that, while you say this is a war that Israel didn't start a year ago, started by Hamas, taken over by Hezbollah, the fact is innocents are getting killed by the thousands, especially in Gaza. So the fear is that if this theater of war expands, many more innocents will be dragged in. Netanyahu says the war is not against the people, it's against regimes, but it's the people who are being killed.
I have not yet seen an army telling people to evacuate areas, giving them detailed maps. Israel did a lot to save civilian lives. But when you have a terrorist organization who is told by its leaders to build weapon storage places in civilian homes, in schools, in mosques, then you cannot come and shout foul when those places are targeted. The crimes of war committed by Hamas, for example, are not only against Israel, it's against their own people who they were in charge of taking care of. And instead of that, they themselves hide in tunnels deep underground and leave the civilians to their misery. So the end game, as I said, is getting peace in Gaza, disarming Hamas, which is almost over, and then getting to an arrangement with regional powers who will take over leadership there, and then with local leadership, get Gaza the chance it should be given to give a full, free life to prosper. The same with Lebanon. Israel wants its 100,000 civilians who have had to leave their homes and are now immigrants in their own country to come back to their home safe from the shelling of Hezbollah. And therefore, as I said, hopefully with an agreement, but otherwise with a ground incursion, which I more don't think will happen, and that will be the end of the conflict in the north. And then the question is Iran going to keep fueling terror into the region, into Yemen, into Iraq, and have more of its proxies attacking Israel? And then if that keeps on going, maybe in the end we will see what happens.
Yeah, but there are no timelines. With due regard, that seems like a very long drawn-out war.
No, not at all. Hamas, as was said earlier by the first professor speaking from Princeton, Hamas is almost obliterated. Hezbollah still has a lot of capabilities and has still thousands of warheads, but has problems in the leadership and also a growing disgruntlement from within Lebanon, who, as we said, Hezbollah is part of Lebanon's problem, not a part of Lebanon's solution. So therefore, we have seen Hezbollah not be the perfect proxy. Hezbollah and Nasrallah have not been the most disciplined, have not carried out all instructions they have from Iran, as opposed to the Houthis, for example. And therefore, I'm not even sure that the Iranian regime is so sad to see the back of Nasrallah, because they will appoint someone who maybe will be doing more of their bidding.
Right. Kabir Taneja, all of this, of course, happening while India is just watching by at the moment, seeing how this situation develops. We've heard the Prime Minister speak to Benjamin Netanyahu, hoping that peace will be brought in. Does India have any role at all to play here, given the nature of the conflict, or we just simply have to hope that the conflict finds a solution? Even the Americans don't really seem to have any solution at the moment.
Rajdeep, no, I don't think India has any sort of play in this particular conflict. India has good relations with Israel, it has good relations with Iran, and it has good relations with the Gulf states. That is one thing that a lot of people expect India to mobilize. But at the best, what India can do is sort of reach out and ask for a quick ceasefire or a quick intervention of sorts. But the only country that has the political and diplomatic capability, along with the history, that is required to sort of step into this conversation is, for the better or worse, the US. But right now, the US is too busy with its own elections. And even till a couple of months ago, getting a ceasefire done before U.S. elections, both either from the Hamas side or from the other sides, would have been probably too complicated, and they were all basically waiting for much more clarity to come from Washington D.C. in January. So I think, but a lot depends on what the role the U.S. plays. Till now, it has been unable to sort of stitch together any kind of process or diplomatic intervention that can have a meaningful impact. So we'll have to wait and watch on that front. India, I'm afraid, not so much.
Syed Mohammad Marandi, in Tehran, the general feeling across the world is, Iran is being seen as a dangerous, as the real danger to global peace. That's how large parts of the world, Western world, see it. Are you in Tehran disappointed in that way, that you are today once again being almost ostracized and being held responsible for promoting the likes of the Hezbollah?
Well, you can tell from the walkout from the UN General Assembly that the Global South is disgusted with the Israeli regime and its atrocities and its racism and its targeting of women and children, whether in Gaza or the West Bank or Lebanon or Syria or Yemen. The regime has a practice, a policy of targeting ordinary people.
General Asif Orion, final word from you. What would your message be to my Iranian guest and indeed those who might see the axis of resistance challenging Israel in the weeks ahead? General Orion, can you hear me? Let me try. General Orion, if you can hear me, what's your message therefore? What do you believe will be Israel's message to Iran and indeed these other countries in the weeks ahead?
We have an old Hebrew saying that he who sows wind will reap storm. So if Iran insists on attacking Israel once more directly, it will face a final response on this. It's not something that Israel will continue to sit down and take the blows just because Iran orchestrates it by indirect ways, over time, doing it in strange methods. Israel is up on its feet and resolved to fight back.
Okay. On that note, I think what we are seeing clearly is a big picture of a conflict which everyone knows is uncertain as to how it will play out. The real possibility of it escalating can no longer be ruled out. Is there an end game out there? Certainly one that doesn't seem to be in sight at the moment. I appreciate all my guests joining me from across the world for sharing your insights. Most insightful. Thank you so much for joining us on the news today.